Hello and welcome to this video. I'm tacking on to the end of the Biotech Basics playlist. I haven't done a proper biology video in a while, and this bit of really good news that came out yesterday seems a good reason to do so. So as you've probably seen, this news story is being reported that the children born to a technique legalised in the UK 10 years ago of mitochondrial transplant, i.e. using donor mitochondria and the nuclear DNA from parents, has cured 8 children of hereditary diseases that would have limited their life or possibly been fatal. So fantastic news, amazing work, and well done to the good people at Newcastle University who pioneered this research. Absolutely fantastic biology news, saving lives of previously incurable diseases. But wag finger BBC, bad science reporting, right? As we can see, calling this 3-parent babies or babies made from using the DNA of 3 people could obviously be seen as very sensationalist, very clickbaity, and very missing the point, oversimplification. So can we do better? Well, I say, as a science communicator myself, yes, we can do a lot better than this. So can we do better? Now, it's not as though we're asking people to remember a very complicated bit of science here. I've borrowed the pictures here from Year 7 science lessons. This is the first thing children learn in biology coming into secondary schools, is the structure of a cell. And you probably remember learning about the mitochondria at school as the powerhouse of the cell. Now, we don't like that on exam answers, but it's perfectly good enough to understand what we're doing. Yet the BBC seems to want to steer clear of using words like mitochondria, respiration, and all those kind of other words, okay? So the mitochondria, as you can see it there on our diagram up here, is where respiration takes place. And plant cells have them, animal cells have them. If you want to be fancy, it's all the eukaryotic cells have got mitochondria. And in some people, the mitochondria don't work properly. Now, we need to draw a distinction here. Okay, we need to draw a distinction here between respiration and breathing. And this line, which was repeated on the radio this morning on the Esteemed Today programme, just made me scream at the radio, right? Mitochondria are tiny structures inside nearly every one of our cells. Yeah, fair enough. There are some that don't have them. They are the reason we breathe. What? No, they're not. As they use oxygen to convert food into the form of energy our bodies use as fuel. That is gibberish, absolute nonsense, right? Firstly, respiration is not breathing, right? Some organisms breathe to do gas exchange to provide oxygen for the chemical reaction that's respiration, okay? There's a big list of things here that do respiration, have mitochondria, but do not breathe. Fish, plants, fungi, insects, algae, I could go on and on and on. Jellyfish, sponges, amoeba, all sorts of different things, right? And to say it's the reason we breathe as though there's some kind of option to do it a different way if you're a human is nonsense, okay? Respiration is not breathing. I would level that criticism at the writers of the I Concise Crossword as well, right? Why could they not simply say mitochondria are where respiration takes place, which is a chemical reaction that releases energy? That's all they needed to say. They could even simplify it and say oxygen's needed to burn your food to release energy. That's what keeps us warm, and that happens in mitochondria, right? Now, obviously, I would prefer we use the correct form for this form of energy, right, or this molecule, right, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. But you'd have to be at least GCSE, at least 14, to understand what that was. And obviously the BBC don't feel that we can cope with that, right? So mitochondria are the site of respiration. And if respiration, i.e. the process of releasing energy from biological molecules, right, doesn't work properly, you can see it's going to give you some pretty serious health issues. So I am literally borrowing pictures here from our Year 7 biology lessons on cell structure. So this is what's actually happening, okay? I would call it mitochondrial transplant, okay? It would be better. Or I would call it using a donor egg casing, right? So the nucleus, as we probably know from Year 7 science, controls the cell, right? Controls the chemical reaction of the cell. That's because it's got the vast majority of your DNA in it, okay? That is where all the genes that code for proteins that make you exist. Now, for various evolutionary reasons that I find fascinating, mitochondria having been in some distant part of history free-living bacteria, they have a tiny, teeny, 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 tiny bit of DNA, okay? Now, the BBC is reporting this as 0.01% of the DNA. That is wrong, right? We measure DNA in base pairs. These things here, in our famous double helix, each one of these spokes represents a base, okay? And your nucleus has about 3 billion of them, right? Give or take. We know precisely in the mitochondria that there are 16,569, and that is about 6 millionths of a percent of your DNA, right? A very, very, very tiny amount of DNA. And that DNA is only concerned with the mitochondria doing its job, which is respiration. That's it, okay? So saying this is sort of DNA coming from 3 parents or from 3 people misleads the non-specialist. Okay, it misleads the non-specialist. It is irrelevant. Okay, so this diagram actually, which comes from the Human Fertility and Embryology Agency, who are fantastic, right? As you can see the source down there, and I've nicked from the BBC site. So well done, BBC, for putting this up. This is good. Actually shows what's going on, right? What we're doing here is if the mother, and it is always the mother who donates the mitochondria, has faulty mitochondria, right, that are passed on down via her egg cells, right? What you can actually do using IVF is fertilise one of her eggs in the laboratory, IVF style. We've been doing that for decades, right? And then you can go in and take the nuclear DNA, i.e. the DNA that's going to make you, and going to make their child, right, out, and put it into the empty casing of a donor egg. So you take a healthy egg with healthy mitochondria, you take that nucleus out, you ditch that, so that has nothing of the donor left in, no personality traits, no anything, right? And you put that in, you put your healthy nuclear DNA from the parents into the healthy egg casing, and the mitochondria will power that nucleus to produce a healthy offspring, which is what's been proven today. And that is fantastic, right? It's a relatively simple thing using a lot of existing technology that the people of Newcastle University have honed and refined. So well done them, okay? A better analogy for me, right, would be something like changing the batteries in a remote control. If you've changed the batteries in the remote control, have you changed the brand of the remote control so it can no longer operate your TV? No, of course you haven't. You've just changed the batteries. For very old people who had cars as old as I did when I started driving, it's like changing the distributor cap from the one that came with the car to the one that you could get generically from Halfords. Okay, the distributor cap distributes a spark, which lights the fuel, right? A bit like mitochondria. Have you changed the brand or make of your car? No, right? In my case, it's still a terrible old Seat Ibiza with a slippery clutch and a manual choke, right? Or perhaps more biologically speaking, we could talk about organ transplantation. We don't describe transplant recipients as 4-parent DNA individuals because they've got their own parents and the 2 parents that donated, of the person who donated the organ. We don't say, "Oh, look at that person over there who's a 4-parent person or a 4-DNA person." We say to them, well, look, it's a transplant recipient. It's someone who's had a transplant. That is a much better way to explain the salient point of what this technique is, okay? It's about transplantation of a bit that isn't working for a bit that is. And also saying that you've got 3 DNA's worth of 3 people's DNA in your cell rather misses a bigger evolutionary point that we've all got everybody's because we all go back to an evolutionary origin. So what does mitochondrial DNA actually do? You might be thinking, well, okay, fair enough. What does mitochondrial DNA actually do though? What does that 6 millionths of a percent actually do? Well, here's the only complicated diagram I'm going to put in this, which is a genetic map of the circular DNA. Again, unusual. We know ours are usually on chromosomes. Circular DNA shows its evolutionary history as a bacteria, right? And all those little arrows on there, they're all the little genes. And they're all genes for bits of respiration machinery. So they're all genes that make proteins that are involved in burning glucose and burning other biological molecules and releasing the energy in a form that the cell can use. None of them have anything to do with any higher function than that. But if they're broken, it means you can't release energy in your cells, which means debilitating illness and often death, right? As I'm sure you can see from this explanation. So why does this matter? Why am I so het up and angry about this bad bit of science reporting? Well, firstly, it's because the science is amazing and the reporting just doesn't do it justice. But secondly, simplification. We've all lived through the pandemic, right? Simplification of biological material leads to conspiracy and fear. We all Remember people talking about stopping respiration with masks, and those conspiracy lot who are, oh, masks will stop me respiring and I need to respire. Fundamentally misunderstanding what respiration is. I had a number of those emails and those people contacting me based on stuff I put on this YouTube channel. Right? People saying, oh, it's the thin end of the wedge. If we're going to have 3 parents, why not 12? Why not take all the best genes from 100 people and splice them all together? Because that's not what we're doing in this technique. We're changing the batteries, right? We're not messing around with the nuclear DNA. Playing God is another one that's an emotive term that doesn't really mean much unless you specify. And the idea of like, well, who would the parents actually be? If you've got 3 people's DNA, is that other person a parent of yours? No, it's not, right? For example, would the manufacturer of your generic distributor cap take responsibility for your car off the dealer or the manufacturer of that car? No, of course they wouldn't, right? So this is the problem that it leads to, okay? Why is this interesting then, right? Why do we actually care, okay? So why do we actually care? Oh, and then of course you've got the designer babies problem as well at the end there. People talking about designer babies, right? So why is this interesting, and why should it be being shouted from the rooftops in a really interesting way? Well, this is a cure to a previously incurable disease. It's permanent and it's total. These children won't need to take this therapy their entire life. They won't need constant medical visits. They have been cured, and that is incredible. A total genetic cure, and that's the miracle of genetic medicine, right? And also their children will be cured as well, because this is what we call a germline edit. So you're editing stuff that can be inherited by the next generation, i.e. the mitochondria, versus just editing body cells, which are referred to as somatic cells, that other genetic therapies do, right? This cure will act in perpetuity. So you have basically taken this form of disease out of that family line entirely, which I find incredible, right? I find that absolutely incredible. But then the real ethical question, and there are ethical questions around this, is are we okay affecting future generations like this? Okay. Now in this instance, because we're not messing with the nuclear DNA, we're not changing anything other than the way their bodies metabolize glucose, right, or their cells release energy, right, I would say that most people would say that we are. But there is a question of, like, well, germline editing in general, but that is a separate ethical conundrum, okay, and that is one conversation we should be having, but it's not, I would argue, relevant to what's going on in this technique, okay? Biology is amazing at the moment, and as I say to my students, the question is not can we do, because the answer to that is pretty much yes, as we're seeing today. The question is, should we do? So, the second reason, and I'll leave you with this, of why this is interesting is the evolutionary one. Your mitochondria come from your mum, as we've described. They come from the eggs, right? The sperm have the head and the little thorax bit and the little body bit and the tail. And that body bit gets left outside the egg when, or at least that was conventional wisdom. There is some research to say that doesn't happen, but mitochondria tend to come from the mother, right? The sperm doesn't donate those. So your mother will have got them from her mother, and her mother will have got them from her mother, and her mother, and her mother, and her mother. So your mitochondria that you're carrying around in every one of your cells now represents an unbroken maternal line to the start of humanity. Something some science communication person called mitochondrial Eve, which again I think was a fairly poor choice, because that then brought out people who went, aha, scientists have proved Adam and Eve. Right? Not so. That unbroken line of mitochondria, right, back to this maternal ancestor of all of us and beyond the start of humanity, has remained unbroken through all the generations until now. And you're living through that time where we can take control of that particular form of heredity. And that is amazing. And that's a really big thought about how we affect our own evolution. Okay? So I want to finish by saying congratulations again to the people of Newcastle University who came up with this genetic cure. It's an amazing testament to what can be done with British bioscience and what goes on in our amazing universities, and how I do firmly believe that this is the age to be a biologist. So well done, Newcastle University, and all the best to the people who have had this cure. I hope you realise what a wonderful miracle that you are, right? And what a wonderful testament to human ingenuity you are. And BBC, please assume we have at least a Year 7 education in science. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again.